So thank you everyone for being here with us today. I do want to recognize the sensitivity of this topic and take a minute to honor those who have left us and that bring each of our unique voices together today. So if we could just pause for just a moment. Thank you. I also want to give some context for those of you who don't know who I am. My name is Sonia Bowman, and I am the Executive Director of the Construction Industry Alliance for Suicide Prevention. Today, we are going to have a very real and honest conversation about loss survivorship, and I have an esteemed panel who will join me, and I'm going to introduce them in just a minute. So to get this conversation started, I want to talk about the fact that there are some buckets or categories of advocates, storytellers, or bystanders that come to this conversation, and depending on what you read or who you speak with, use the terminology a little bit differently. So as we go through this conversation, we are going to talk about those who have lived experience as someone who has experienced their own suicidal ideation or who has made a suicide attempt. And we are going to focus on this conversation on loss survivors or someone who has lost someone to suicide. And really what has brought this conversation to light is that about a year ago, I was reading and I came across a document put together by the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention called Responding After a Suicide, the National Guidelines. And that really the document gave me some pause because there's a significant piece of the document that talks about loss survivorship and what it means, and frankly, who feels comfortable using that term. And more importantly, whether or not people feel like they're qualified to use it. And so that's really what we're going to focus on today. As a little bit of disclaimer, as we always do when we have one of our webinars, we will be talking about suicide in a safe and compassionate manner. But we will also be talking about loss today. And if that does not feel comfortable for you or it becomes activating in any way, please feel free to leave the webinar, but make sure you're taking care of yourself. It will be recorded, and if you wish to come back to it at a later date, you are more than welcome to. I do want to share my esteemed panel with all of you and ask them to introduce themselves. So joining me today is Bob Vanderpool, Terry Olson, and Paul Lawson. Paul, why don't you kick it off and share with us a little bit of your background, please?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for having me on this panel. Yep, everybody, Paul Lawson. I am a mental health advocate full-time for the construction industry. I do speaking and training and program development for companies. My background, I'm actually formerly a middle school and high school youth pastor who found myself in the construction industry a few years ago, back in 2019. So that's a big part of my background. I'm also a two-time cancer survivor who, through that experience, bottomed out in my mental health, developed a pretty non-healthy drinking problem, and then got a lot of help through that. So really saw kind of a roller coaster of mental health in my story. So a couple years ago, the contractor that I was working with lost a foreman to suicide. And through that experience and the postvention process that we went through as a company, I found a lot of purpose for my background and what I do and infusing it into our industry. So this is what I do, and I'm happy to be able to provide any of that story and anything I've learned today. So good to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. Terry, if you could share with us, please.
Sure. So thank you, Sonia, and everyone on this session. I'm really honored to be asked to participate. So my story, I've been in the construction industry for about 20 years. I co-own and operate a pretty good sized civil construction company here in Colorado. My youngest son is the co-owner, and so I live it every day. Lots of employees, lots of challenges, and I'm surrounded by, continual mental health topics, challenges, education, things that I'm very passionate about. We'll hear more about this later, but 14 years ago, we lost my oldest son, Tyler, to suicide at the age of 25. And Tyler had also worked part-time for the company. And so it wasn't just my loss, a family loss. It was truly everyone's loss. So there's a lot that goes with that. I'm just grateful that this webinar is happening because I think a lot of the loss survivors, not that we get lost in the shuffle, but many times the stories and the experiences can help others. I think it's important.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And thank you both for sharing your stories with us. Bob, take it away, please.
It's rather ironic that I'm involved in this one because I was the kid who never successfully built a birdhouse, and now I'm talking to construction professionals. Clinical background through mostly in critical incident response. So at one point I was president of Crisis Care Network, now called R3 Continuum, which is the world's largest provider of that service. And so heavily involved in postvention through that. Today, I am doing a lot of training with veterans and active military and organizations that work with them, and we're working on suicide protection and suicide prevention. I was co-chair with Sally Spencer Thomas, co-chair of the Workplace Task Force of the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention years ago, and introduced that organization to Cal Bayer, who is common in relationship to all of us and is probably wearing a sweater vest and watching right now. So very, very pleased to be here. We're all within 1 to 2 degrees of separation from someone who's died by suicide and those who love them. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you. Before we launch into our topics of discussion today, you are welcome to ask any questions that you would like in the Q&A section. We do have some time set aside at the end to be able to address those questions, and we will do our best to make sure we get to all of them and answer them as we can. So, Bob, I would love to have you kind of walk through for us a little bit more deeply the framework on a suicide loss, if you don't mind.
Okay. Thinking about who's impacted by a death by suicide. I know in critical incident response, we always work really closely with the organization to draw the circles of impact. Who are those who are most likely to have been intimately impacted, and then to move out systems theory from there. That's often really complicated because it's not about the incident, it's about the impact. And the same incident impacts different people very differently. The same incident impacts the same person differently day after day because it's never linear. It's all over the place. And so you go to an incident where it seems like everybody should have the same reaction, and you get crying, giggling, cussing, million-mile stare, and wanting to go to the mall, all in the same incident. And it changes. They play musical chairs the next day, I swear. So it's about the impact, not the incident. And as we draw circles of impact about who is a lost survivor, sometimes one tragedy can lead to additional tragedies because there'll be people who say, well, I wasn't there, or I wasn't their best friend, or I wasn't family. I don't think I belong, but yet this is so devastating for me. And you have to look at the context of that person, and often it's an invisible context. They may have lost somebody else to suicide. They may have lost somebody else to other causes of death. They may have had ideation themselves. You never know what's going on. Nothing ever happens in a vacuum, right? And so there are times when people will be deeply impacted, but not feel as though they have permission to be so. And then, boy, then I feel like a pathetic wimp, too frail for life. I'm impacted and I shouldn't be. And sometimes there are other people who will also say, no, you don't belong. You don't belong. This is our tragedy, and what are you doing feeling so strongly about it? It's complicated, and one tragedy can lead to additional fragmentation of relationships and additional tragedies there as well. There's that invisible context. There are also rare occasions where there are folks who seem to glom on to anything that's dramatic. You know, there are heat-seeking missiles. Sorry, I'm saying that not being pejorative. These are valuable human beings. I think they make it difficult for those who are not giving themselves permission because of the boundaries that are built. I'm going to encourage folks to err on the side of inclusion here because you don't know. You don't know what's going on in the rest of this person's life. And you don't have to have an official letter sweater to be part of the club, right? So let's be gracious to anyone because it's about the impact, not the incident.
Thank you. And that provides a lot of context to this conversation. And I still think that there's probably a bit, and I think that all of the panelists could to lend to this a little bit, but there's a little bit of fear maybe about being defined by a loss, or even some stigma that goes with that. And people are not sure if they have that right.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you want to lend more conversation to
Yeah,
that.
sure
Or
will. Sure
handle
will.
it.
So I've already described myself as a carpenter. Okay. And when my wife very rarely convinces me to put a hammer in this hand, this thumb is in mortal danger. And when I very, very predictably smack this thumb, even though it represents a very minute percentage of my total body mass, for about 72 hours, it defines me. And it feels like everything revolves around this throbbing digit, right? Getting dressed, typing, driving, everything you do hurts. And it's like, this is all that who I am. So sometimes there is a risk of someone assuming an identity now as trauma victim. And victims' lives are very, very small. Victims' lives are like driving in park and only looking in the rearview mirror, right? And so that's an awful place to be a victim of a death by suicide rather than a survivor of a death by suicide, rather than a loss survivor. Survivor means I'm moving forward. I'm looking out of the windshield and checking my rearview mirror because it was real, but I'm doing both, moving forward. So I think that's a piece of that. But there's also something that happens when we get shocked by something like suicide. Okay. And I want you to think about your life. Okay. So, Paul, the day that you were born, I don't know anything about this, but I'm just going to say your mama had great prenatal care. They paid a doctor a very large amount of money and they went to school a long time. They got you Pampers and Gerber baby food, and they were proud of you when you learned to crawl and to walk. And then they taught you look both ways, wear training wheels on your bicycle, learn to color, go to school, study hard, get good grades, go to college. And everything was moving in one direction. Everything was unidirectional, guiding you toward safe arrival at your own death at age 92, painlessly with dignity, surrounded by your friends and family singing Amazing Grace, right?
Right.
That was the theme. That was where everybody was going. That's what we're all on. That's the track we're on. When somebody dies by suicide, that's like you're on the freeway and here comes a car going the wrong way right in front of you. That's what it feels like, and it shocks. And so when we're activated like that, the part of our brain, and this is a whole nother workshop, so I'll be quick, but there's a limbic reaction. Your amygdala kicks in and you're kicked into fight, flight, freeze as though you're in danger as well. And when that happens, that part of your brain is very focused on where's the bad guy? How do I be safe? Something dangerous just happened. Even though my life wasn't in danger, I lost somebody precious to me. And so it's very, very common for this index finger to look for someone to blame. And so you will hear people identifying one thing. Of course they died by suicide. Their boss was a jerk. Of course they died by suicide. They're going through a divorce. Of course they got suicide. They got cut from the soccer team. And that part of our brain will line up one thing with one thing and assign blame. So who wants to be blamed for somebody's death, right? And so there's stigma when you're a lost survivor because you were close. So there's this sense of, people think that I did something wrong? Do people think that, I'm going to use real language here, sorry, but do they think that I killed this person? How's that for stigma? And then it's also true that when there's not a readily recognized bad guy, that finger will often go and we blame ourselves.
Right. Did I not do enough? Could I, woulda, shoulda,
Woulda,
etc.
coulda, shoulda. What did I say? What didn't I say? What did I do? What did I not do? And once that stigma also, right? And so being close, there's also that sense of, is it my fault? And do people think that it's my fault? And so it can be really hard to be a survivor.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I think this is a segue for us to have a conversation with Terry about that, because I think that you and I have had lots of conversation about what that looks like and what you all had to go through. Would you be comfortable sharing a little bit about your loss and your son with us?
Absolutely. So I want to say thank you to Bob. Bob, you took the words out of my mouth. Everything you described is very accurate and timely, if you will. It's an important realization that a lot of people don't truly understand, right? Whether they're directly involved or they're more on the periphery of what's happening. So for us, so let me tell you about Tyler. Most beautiful human being, truly. I mean, like all of us, I would say that about everyone around me, but he was the most caring, kind, smart, funny, handsome guy. You know, he was just, everyone thought he was going to do great. So when Bob talked about you get him through childhood, you're down the path, you've got a goal, and every parent wants the best for their children. I believe that. And along the way, some things cropped up. And as parents, you start to pay attention to that. And I can tell you, you know, this was the kid that had a very close group of friends, had good grades, highest SAT to this day at his high school with a plaque. You know, the kids used to hire him in college, I shouldn't be telling this, to take the online math test for them, right? Because he was an entrepreneur, so he was reeling in the bucks doing
A little side hustle.
hustle there. So you know, he was making some money. And, you know, he had, for the most part, a pretty, he was an intense person, but I felt like he truly had a level of happiness. And what we really saw early on, not to get into all the signs, but alcohol became his friend. And I heard Paul talk about that. So for him, he was a little bit shy with the girls. You know, he wanted to expand his circle, close group of friends, you know, throughout his life. And so the alcohol became, in high school, my God, he was the life of the party. And his friends would tell me stories. God, we've never seen him like that. He was like outgoing, gregarious. It wasn't the guy we knew, a little bit more on the introverted side. And we became concerned, and actually through some friends of ours in the medical community, found him a counselor in high school. Awesome. I felt safe as a parent at that point because he was getting help. And I remember the day he came home with a new book, and it was something around an introvert living in an extroverted world. And to him, it was a revelation. Oh my God, I put a name to it. Now we've, you know, psychoanalyzed me, and this is my challenge, and so is going to help me through this. And we kind of watched him progress, went off to college. College was tough, tougher than he thought, because when you're the smartest kid and you just open up a book and magically you do great, it wasn't like that anymore. So the roadblocks started piling up, the challenges. At one point, when he was 20 years old, he was in a car accident that he should have not survived. Literally. He was in the hospital for 3 days. Nobody knew. He was over 18. He literally disappeared from our lives, and he was gone. And it was an all-out manhunt until he finally showed up at the house one day wearing his hospital gown and a pair of jeans and said, "I'm back." So, I mean, but part of that was his personality. He thought, well, they're going to be upset with me, but if I shock them a little, I'm back in the fold. So, you know, just to give you a sense of his personality, he cared about people deeply. He had such a good heart, and I think that was part of his challenge. He listened, he cared on a deep level. He felt pain more than some of us do. And from there, he ended up going, when he dropped out of college, went to night school, was working construction, worked for us for a few years, part-time. We thought we were finally making progress. The month before he passed, he came to my husband and I and said, "I think I need help. I've reached out through the health insurance program. I'm trying to see 1 of 3 counselors." He came back and said 2 aren't taking new patients. A third, it's a 3-month wait. So again, when Bob talks about coulda, shoulda, woulda, we said, okay, Ty, we'll help you. I know you're 25, you're on your own, you're an adult. I started making calls because at that time we didn't have a good suicide prevention program in the company. Did everything in my power, and literally 2 weeks later, he took his life and the journey started. And we had, if you think about it, when Bob talks about the world stopped, Bob, it stopped. That day, it didn't matter. It was like the thumb that got hit with the hammer, everything stopped. And we were in total shock. So yes, it's our kid, but it impacted so many people, hundreds of people. When we were planning his funeral, we literally had hundreds of people show up, Sonia. And I remember the church saying, Terry, we can't accommodate them all. I said, I don't care. Make it standing room only. Sure. We're going to turn this into a celebration of this person and his life. And I will tell you that the biggest challenge early on is predominantly me, my husband. We became the counseling center for all the friends, his brother, for everyone. And hardest thing I've ever been involved in, but we became the go-to, with people dropping by, telling us stories. We found out so many things, and so many of his friends knew how bad he was struggling. So you talk about guilt. They had to show up to tell us stories to relieve their guilt, as we should have told you. This is what happened last month. I had a suicide pact with him that we wouldn't commit suicide. Can you imagine? From his very best friend. It gives me chills to this day. But how could we blame any of those people? It was not their fault. This individual was on a path. And this individual, my son, made a choice. And so that was the beginning of the whole healing process for both us, the community, his friends, everybody that was involved, our employees who knew him. It was a shocker. I mean, that reverberated throughout the company for a very long time, and trying to have sessions where people could talk about it. So long story short, that became my mission. I knew that my son would want me to speak out. I knew that the way that I could personally heal and help others was to become an advocate, to lean into that grief, to figure it out and move through all these different emotions. And then secondly, to help others. And I think that was my magic ticket, Bob. I became an advocate, a catalyst to try to help others, because that gratitude and all the lessons that I learned, all the grief, all the guilty feelings, once you move through that, then looking from almost the other side, it's okay. He's still with us, right? And so all these other people that have been on the journey with us, they're now a part of our collective being, if it will. And so that's why I'm here. I hope that gave you some context around it. It's a really hard place to be. It's somewhere you never want to be. And I do want to say a lot of mothers and even some fathers I've talked with over the years, often the biggest risk when you lose a child is the surviving parents. You'll hear a lot of mothers talk about, I can't be here. Huge issue for potential suicide with especially moms. And I didn't want to be that mom. I wanted to be a survivor, but I also wanted to help others. And I will tell you, my youngest son, the first 10 years of the loss, because it's been 14 years, he was mad. And some of you can understand that. He didn't leave mad. There was mad in every day of his life. And his comments were, how could he leave me? And how could he give up? He was my best bud. I can tell you today, through a lot of intervention and help, finally, a few years ago, he started smiling again, and it was like a party. We're like, oh my God, he's back. But it took him a decade, so there's no right or wrong way to grieve or to get through the feelings or to embrace the feelings and move to the next stage. So I just tell you, be patient with people. Be kind to yourself. Have grace. I think that's really important. So thank you for letting me share.
And thank you for sharing, Tyler, with us. You really painted a beautiful picture of what this process looks like and a lot of what it means to be a loss survivor, especially within a family, and even shared a little bit about sibling loss. So thank you for doing that. Paul, you also are a loss survivor. And I know that it's been difficult to accept that, I guess, or the title of that role based on your experiences. Can you dig in a little bit for us on that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. And Terry, I'm kind of going to be piggyback off of everything that you just shared with us too. So I came into the industry in 2019 with the background being a pastor, fresh off of surviving cancer the second time. And when we started talking about well-being kind of at our company in Columbus, we hadn't gone through a postvention as a company. So we were very much in a proactive space, but we really hadn't gotten the ball rolling too much yet. And then in 2022, March, that's when we lost our foreman to suicide. I'll never forget the day. And that was at that time, again, we had started kind of kickballing some mental health stuff, and I had met Cal before that, and he shared resources with us, but we just hadn't really gotten it going, really. And so when I found out who it was that died, this was a person that I had only met maybe like twice. I think I helped do his employee orientation, maybe done some paperwork for him, but that was really it. So this is really kind of coming at it from a different perspective, and Terry, in that like you were in the direct epicenter, losing a family member, losing a son. I was, and from my angle, this wasn't somebody that was directly in my circle. This was a person, but I'm connected to and I'm talking to people who did know him. And so for the longest time, for a bit, I had this sort of feeling of like, as a loss survivor, do I qualify to have that term? Am I a loss survivor? Because this is somebody that I did not have a direct connection with, a direct friendship with, but I'm out connecting and talking to people who did. And I started kind of thinking a little bit deeper into, okay, I'm finding. And this is also before we found out that, we had the statistics of suicide in the industry and seeing, oh, we're very much not alone as a company. There are many, many, many other companies who have struggled with this as well. So seeing that okay, well, for me to take on the mantle of lost survivor, I had to kind of reach into myself to kind of realize that through the course of my story and my mental health journey and me seeing that I had to go through kind of a season of refinding value in my life, through a life that I felt like I almost lost, and then fighting to keep it, and then coming into an industry where I'm realizing that there is the struggle of people maybe finding value in their life, and that if there's advocacy that can be done, I don't have to have directly known this person, directly been friends with them, had this long history with them in order for me to be able to step into this place as loss survivor and take on the mantle of advocate. I can just take that shred of care for people that I have for anybody with a beating heart and take on that mantle of advocate. So that's when I decided if that term of loss survivor, Bob, I love that you keep coming back to just we should be inclusive with this. This should be a grace-filled term. This should be something that casts a wide net for many, many people, because we need as many people at the table as we possibly can get in this mission of advocacy. That's when I realized okay, I'm ready to step up and do this work. And that's when I decided this is what I want to do, whether I'm at a sole company or whether I'm doing this for as many companies as I can. So to me, I think what I found in that entire situation is that it's okay that I did not know this person directly. On the other end of it, in the last couple of years, I've gotten to know his family pretty well and spent time with them and been able to listen to their memories. And Terry, the way that you talked about your son and the memories and what he loved, and I was able to share that experience talking to this foreman who we lost, talking to his family, and them reminisce and them remember. And seeing that every single person that we can save is attached to these memories that are connected to loved ones and family. And it's it just lights a fire under the work that we do. So anyway, that's, again, kind of a long answer to what you were talking about, Sonia, and that, yes, we lost somebody. It was somebody who I was not directly connected with very closely. But on the other end of it, finding that you do not have to be very close to somebody. You can be pretty far out from the epicenter and still find purpose in this work and take on that mantle of advocate.
I think that's a really important piece of this conversation, and that you can claim that role as a loss survivor. We spend so much time with the people that we work with, and that it's often they are as close to us as family in many, many cases. And so there is no delineation there. Speaking of the work piece of this, though, I do want to ask, what does that look like from a where do you go next with the conversation? So, in a workplace, how do you can't go directly to start teaching people about the warning signs or the risk factors that they probably missed or could have potentially missed. So, what
Yeah.
is that? I kind of call it that space in between. What does that look like from a how do you start having these conversations? And I think you probably could all weigh in on this because Terry, you probably had to start some sort of advocacy or education, Bob, maybe the clinical aspect of it. And Paul, what did you guys do at Mid City? So
Yeah.
I'll let you kind of take that, please.
Yeah. Yeah. And Bob, I want to lean on you too and Terry, because it's like we really like when we lost our foreman, like we very quickly realized like, oh, we don't actually have a plan as a company here. Like we don't have something in place about like, okay, what do we do next? I would say and if she's listening, I hope that if she is listening, Angie, our HR director over at Mid City, did an incredible job, I think, putting together a plan on the fly. That looking back on it and then reading resources that are out there, Bob, like you've helped put out there about a manager's guide to postvention in the workplace. Looking back on it, like we happened to kind of follow along with it, kind of step by step a little bit. There was a lot of focus on communication with the family. What are they okay with communicating? Getting out there and speaking to the crew, having a communication plan for what goes out to the crews and to the rest of the company. All of that stuff kind of laid out and kind of validated after the fact. But there was that kind of like, without actually reaching out to Dave Matthews and trying to get a little bit of a credit for his song title, the space between, for anybody who knows that song, 90s hit. But it does kind of feel right, this term about going between from the time that you lose somebody to the time that you kind of switch back to that sort of prevention upstream space. There is that sort of gap there that feels like you need to honor that person. You need to take care of the family, take care of the crew, communicate well, give that space before you start putting out education again. And I think that's what for us, we landed in this kind of spot where we took, I don't remember exactly. I remember it was like the 2 months after or a month after I went to the Denver Construction Working Mind Summit, got trained to do Vital Cog. And that was like the company's mandate to come in and start doing that training after a point. So I think it was a few months after we lost our foreman. And in that time frame was all that communication and time. There was we had a grief counselor out on site. I went out on site and did toolbox talks and started, meeting with the crews. It was in that space we started kind of doing that direct boots on the ground work. And then we kicked off our training a few months later and it kicked off our prevention plan there and upstream. Yeah, Bob, but that's all a lot of that. I mean, Bob, you can speak to the document that you helped write with Sally, about that there is kind of a plan that companies can follow.
Yeah, there is. I want to come back to what you talked about the space between. And again, when there's something as shocking as a death by suicide, trust is really in jeopardy. Trust of the company's leadership is really in jeopardy. And Terry, I can't imagine what it was like for you leading your people and being within the closest circle of impact. Wow, talk about dual roles. But trust is in jeopardy, and there will be a population. It depends upon the culture of your organization. It depends upon the morale and the trust that's there or not there. But there will be a population of very skeptical people who are looking for somebody to blame. And everybody likes to blame their boss, right? We all do that from time to time. That's just it. That's why we call them our boss. And in that space between, it's really important to respond with a lot of compassion and a lot of support and a lot of genuineness, authenticity. And if you care for people and you fully acknowledge what they're going through and provide expert resources to them, like you talked about doing, you earn back some of that trust. If you hold the suicide prevention training the week after someone dies by suicide, the skeptics are going to arise and they're saying, look at it's cover your behind. Right? It's CYA. That's all it is. They know they screwed up. They know they caused this death. They're going to make it happen. And so that space in between isn't just empty space. It needs to be compassionate space. And supervisors, at the supervisor level, it has to be it's really a friction point. It's really a pivot point. People will be caught in, do we grieve or do we move forward? Do we grieve or do we move forward? And the answer is yes. You need to go forward sadly. And just that bifurcation can really fragment a team, can really fragment a leadership team, split between the supervisor and the people, the foreman and the people that are leading. So you don't become walking group therapy, but you also move forward sadly, respecting and offering grace to each other for grieving differently. Then I think you can offer training. I know one company that engaged me said, if we offer suicide prevention training, sorry, we can offer the best pizza in town for that lunch and nobody's coming. And so what we did is we put together a trilogy, and we had the first one be on resilience, because there's no stigma or shame in the fact that life is hard, but I can get through it. And they packed the place out, bought great pizza, and reviews were good. And then we followed that up with one on anxiety and depression. Okay, that was a little more threatening, but still, you could be asking for a friend, right? And then the third one we did was on suicide prevention, and the room was still packed. So I think that was important to earn that, re-earn that trust. And then it could be a situation where you could really jump into the prevention. Terry, I saw your hand. Jump in, please.
Yeah.
So exactly right, gentlemen. So a couple things, being in that in-between place from the very beginning. So I have to tell you, I come from, construction's a tough industry, right? I spent over 20, 25 years in the tech industry. It was tough too. And so this resilience that you talk about, you would show up at work, and even being a leader in both industries, even for me personally, it was really hard to say. My thing was suck it up. Figure it out, suck it up, expectations for myself and others. And of course I can be compassionate, but when we're at work, we're at work. And boy, what a slap in the face to go through any kind of tragedy or challenge or loss, whether personal, workplace, both, etc. So what a life-altering event I encountered and everyone around me. But that in between, it was a total wake-up call, you guys. I mean, it was like, we have to do something. This isn't okay. So, okay, how are we going to do this? Well, think about it. So you're calling your ERP people. We had someone in HR. They are not really trained in the whole mental health on a deeper level, particularly in construction. What are we going to do? And so we started with, like you're saying, an interim drug and alcohol training, because that was a potential precursor, right? And I had experience with it. And so we had our safety person, and we're doing drug and alcohol, compliance. And what does that mean? And what does it look like? And we're using resources back then like mantherapy.org, if you've seen that website. It started here in Colorado. And we were looking at all kinds of creative things. We brought in a gal that teaches about the brain. And so for guys especially, that was a really big deal. They could put a number to it or a process, right? So she's describing the different parts of the brain and what happens during fight or flight, and dealing with depression or aggression or challenges. That was helpful, but it wasn't the answer. It really wasn't. I mean, we were moving that direction, but it's the in-between. And I kept saying, we need a warm line. Where's our warm line? And people are sick of hearing me say that. Well, I don't want to call the crisis line, but if I call the ERP, I'll be on hold for 3 days. I mean, where's the in-between for that? And so we had, unfortunately, another loss. As you gentlemen mentioned, a superintendent on an out-of-town team. And I will tell you, a lot of people on his crew knew there was a problem. Not one of them spoke up. So imagine the guilt and the crisis management going on with that. That very much motivated us. This was a few years after losing Tyler. And I will tell you, in 2019, I believe it was AGC came out with a pilot program for U-Turn Health. I was the first, I think, to sign up, or we were the first here in Colorado. I said, tell me this is a warm line. And once I saw the options with the peer counseling, the education, and a kind of more rounded approach, we bought in hard. And I can tell you that 6 years later, we're still bought in. We have actually saved, I believe, a couple of lives along the way.
Awesome.
And it's so awesome. But gosh darn it, why did it have to be so hard to find all these resources, right? And so even with but we still have to be vigilant, right? There's still challenges every day. And so trying to get the word out there, trying to make sure that this in between becomes an everyday thing. I guess that's part of what I'm seeing.
Thank you for sharing that, for sure. Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the variety of emotions that go with this, about the places and spaces. I guess I want to just take a few minutes to talk about, and Paul, maybe you'll put your ministry hat on for us for a minute for this,
Sure.
but there is still so much guilt that comes with this conversation, and shame that manifests itself in the conversation around suicide, bereavement. How do we address that? How do we take that piece out of this conversation so that we can have more open and honest conversations like the one that we're having today?
Yeah. Yeah. I noticed when I first went out and started talking to the crews that knew our foreman, that knew him directly, worked with him day in, day out. There was a lot of the shoulda, coulda, woulda, the what could we have done? What should we have seen? What was all this? And it took me back when I was a pastor. I remember there being one of my volunteers that I had when I was in ministry was this guy. And he always had this phrase. He said, "You can't keep shoulding on yourself." And it's such a, I know it's a cute phrase, but to me, man, it really kind of hits home, because to me, the equation happened when I was doing a fireside chat with a good friend of mine, Melissa Doman, and somebody from the audience had a Q&A, and he kind of opened up about the situation where he lost a family member, direct circle, and was still in that phase afterwards of, should I have done this? Could I have seen this? And she had this incredible response where she shared basically along the lines of, he may have shown signs, but it may not have been to you. You don't know. You don't know. It's to give yourself grace and to truly believe that you may not have seen anything, and to take that blame and guilt off of your shoulders, so that you can just grieve. I thought that was in that moment, it was incredibly powerful, and it was very much it was thick in the room, because you could tell this dude received it. And I talked to him afterwards, and he said that was a fork in the road moment for me, was hearing that. And I could tell that he just walked with a little bit more levity after that, and just a little more lightness and grace for himself. I think folks need to feel that if you have to go through the tragic situation and tragic time of losing somebody in your company, to be able to get that message out there to the crews, because they will feel it. They may joke about it. They might, again, grief looks like all sorts of different things. Bob, you talked about that earlier, about you got people some of them are crying, some of them are cussing, some of them are joking, some of them are just talking about the movie they just saw. It's it looks like a million different things, but grief is still this through line. But people need to hear that message of, you can't keep shoulding on yourself. You don't know what you don't know. Maybe you didn't see those signs. So I think that message is so incredibly important for people in the company to hear.
Patrick, what ended up happening with our superintendent that passed, I think the biggest thing for leaders is listening, compassion, grace, paying attention, even asking questions. And I will tell you, the really healing moment for us, we took every employee in the company, which was over 50, to his funeral.
Yeah.
We all came. We all dressed alike. There were people in the community, inspectors and other people that came as well. And I will tell you, and it didn't matter whether anyone knew him well or not. He'd been there a long time, but like you said, there's degrees of separation depending on whose crew he was with, what their exposure was. But we actually gave people an opportunity, and this was from the family's request, to say a word or two at his funeral, to with people. I think they needed to get it out. That a lot of them were like, wow, why didn't we see it? And having been through the forgiveness part on a grand scale, it's difficult to have those conversations. And I just felt like that was an aha moment for many of our people, that the family welcomed them, right? We weren't the piranhas in the room that he worked for us and we created all the problems. There was so much forgiveness and so much celebration of his life that to this day I can remember that it was a coming together. And I think if a leader or a company can accomplish that in whatever way, shape, or form, or over time, I think that's important, that we all came together and tried to get out of the blame game, that we could understand and we could try. Our mission then was to prevention, wasn't it? That we would be better listeners and better citizens and better at everything we do, and that we had almost like a military team. We had a mission, and I think that was very helpful with our folks. I really do.
Yeah, I real quick, like what I saw when we were going through the space between in the postvention process, and when we were able to start kind of engaging with some more programming and training and inviting those crews in if they were ready. And they did. They were, when you switch from and you get out there and you meet them where they're at, you help model grief with them and talk about that and give them space. I'll tell you right now, a lot of those crew members or the people in kind of around those circles, you talk about building trust with people. When you do postvention well, it is an opportunity to build trust with those workers that I'm not sure if there's another time that could be more potent to build that kind of trust. That's why, again, if companies are listening to this, being ready for those moments and engaging, lean in, and build that trust with those workers. And I'll tell you right now, those guys are still, a few years later on down the line, they are still right there with us in our peer support team. They get out there and talk about this. They themselves schedule toolbox talks. They are all about the mission.
Really, really, really quick. We've all had a worst day of our life. And if there was somebody who showed up with compassion and listened to us and didn't judge us, we trust them. We will never forget them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if there was somebody who should have been there, who blew us off or judged us or blamed us, we won't forget them either. And so it's a tremendous opportunity to engender trust on the worst day of somebody's life or to really dilute it.
Well said.
Yeah, absolutely. So because I want to leave some time for Q&A, I would like us to just kind of go around and share one thing that we haven't maybe talked about so far that you want to make sure that we're leaving our audience with, we're leaving this conversation with. I do see at least one question in the Q&A, so I want to have some time for that. But as always, there's 60 minutes is not enough time. And so if you don't mind, Terry, why don't you share with us, what is one thing that we maybe haven't covered yet that you want to make sure we leave this conversation with?
So for me personally, every day I focus on lessons learned. And by that I mean I've learned so much from my son and everyone around me, but that loss taught me about love, truly unconditional love. It taught me about forgiveness. It taught me about moving forward. It taught me about helping others. There's so many words that you could use to describe those lessons, but that's what I celebrate every day. In order to move forward, you have to have, or you hope to have, a mindset where gratitude. So if I had to pick a final word, it's gratitude.
What do you want to leave us with or leave our audience with?
You know, again, when people are shocked, they pick one thing that caused the death, and it's usually a multitude of factors that contribute, and many of them are invisible to the people around. Therapists get sued for a lot of stuff, but they don't get sued because they did not predict who was going to do it when, because nobody's been able to do that. When alcohol is present, it's a depressant, and it makes us do things we don't normally do. How do you predict that? Sometimes it's depression, and as people move further down the line of depression, they hide it more and more because they don't fit in. They're only one of their species on the planet. It's also true that sometimes suicide is a tantrum. And there are many, many times where you ask somebody, how long did you think about killing yourself? And they'll say 10 minutes. And so this is, I'm not saying give up. This is really, really hard work. But I'm just saying forgive yourself if you missed one. Forgive yourself if you missed one. It was camouflaged, very likely.
Well, final thoughts.
Yeah. I think my final thought is centered around the word believe. Believe. I think that there are a lot of companies out there that they still internally push against the old school culture of our industry where, you know, we pick ourselves up by the bootstraps and we leave our feelings at the door and, well, this is how my boss did it and I learned under him and we don't, you know, we don't do it this way. And I want companies to believe that they can build a culture of care right now. And under that culture of care is an umbrella that contains prevention, midvention, postvention, the whole works. And it can be a culture that is running all year long. We're in the middle of National Suicide Prevention, Construction Suicide Prevention Week and National Suicide Prevention Month, but to believe that these are practices and talks and vulnerability and things that can happen all year long. And having that postvention plan underneath that umbrella, again, that's that time you can build trust and respect with your teams like you wouldn't believe. Have the plan, talk about this ahead of time, and we hope that it doesn't happen. We hope that that prevention work keeps saving those lives, but have a plan and believe that that culture of care can be built at your company.
Absolutely. Thank you. Before I go through the Q&A, I would like to say that I think where I would like to leave off that we haven't covered are, to simplify it as best I can, is maybe some 3Gs, I call them. And that is the grief that you're feeling comes with a lot of guilt. And I would ask you to give yourself some grace because it is a challenging process. And that grief is not linear, and that it sometimes feels okay to laugh and to cry all in the same day or maybe even in the same hour. So give yourselves that opportunity. Of course, I want to thank my esteemed guest. You all are amazing, and I appreciate your vulnerability and care to this conversation and your support of CIASP. I'm going to quickly jump to the Q&A so that we have a time to talk about it and ask you all to sort of weigh in on that. It looks like we have someone who shared, and I will ask that, we take some time to think about loss and how that works. But as we're sharing, it looks like there's some struggling and you're looking for some resources there. A few of my favorite resources are the National Alliance on Mental Illness. NAMI has some great support groups. And I think this actually answers the second question as well. So there's peer-to-peer in lots of different ways. And I'll ask Paul and Bob and maybe even Terry to touch on that specific to the industry. But if you are looking for support groups, NAMI has some wonderful ones. If you go to NAMI.org, you can narrow it down to your local area. A lot of them are online. Some of them are in person. There are also lots of hospitals have those support groups as well. Your mobile crisis centers or local crisis centers also offer support groups. So those are some places if you are looking for individualized help to be able to find that help as well. And then there was another question in the Q&A that we discussed, and that was posed, and that question was talking a little bit more about peer-to-peer support and what that looks like. So if I could ask.
I can speak. Well, I mentioned peer counseling.
Yes.
Through the U-Turn Health system, where they will match a peer, meaning someone, maybe gender, age, profession, things of that nature, with someone calling in for a conversation or texting or emailing, depending on the method. But you can take that model with the proper training to a local level too, right? So this was an 800 number, and the company would match this peer support to give people a chance to just talk it out, like this warm line we talked about, or to ask questions or look for resources. But as both Paul and Bob can speak to, you can do that even locally or with outside or inside resources, again, proper training, to help people have the ability to ask questions and develop your own peer support. And we've done both, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. The program that we put together over at Mid City, and then I've kind of helped a couple companies build too, is an internal peer support team, a peer support group, and we call it an advocates team. These are folks who have self-identified and said, I want to be a part of this work. And maybe they're a tradesman, maybe they're in safety, maybe they're in the office, but really sharing that mantle of advocate with other people in the office and out in the field, and helping put some structure and guidelines around that. What are some standard trainings that we have folks go through? And really what we've seen over the last couple of years is this is a group that's internal to the company, and they really are the hands and feet of the program. And they are, again, trained in basic listening training and the peer support, how to stay in their lane as a peer support specialist. There are also certifications out there around that are both local and national to be looking into. So there's totally, I can't speak highly enough about the power of building peer support boots on the ground at the company. Those other resources are out there, apps and U-Turn Health and great, those are fantastic. Do those. But also developing that internal group, man, it's powerful.
Absolutely. I will also say that the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, depending on their local chapter, has something called Healing Conversations. If you reach out, you can find their information at afsp.org. And I did drop that and NAMI into the chat, where you can be matched with someone who has had a loss that is similar to yours for a one-time conversation.
And Sonia, I just want to address the individual that was asking about other support in her situation, in her crisis. Reach out to your community. I mean, there are so many. Here in the state of Colorado, there are groups called Second Wind. There's one for young people called Robbie's Hope. Boy, you can go to churches, you can go to mental health clinics, you can go to national organizations. Start building your own resource list. Or if you know anybody, like I would probably call Paul and say, hey, Paul, who's in my area, if I lived in your area, that might be a resource. Use your connections. And look, you might be a one-on-one person. Some people like groups. I was never a group person, but I found help one-on-one. So I'm just saying that, boy, man, get good at using AI if you have to.
Yeah, why not?
Absolutely.
You know, it's there.
In respect to everyone's time, I want to say thank you. I want to thank our audience for joining us today. There will be a recording of this. It will be on our YouTube channel. But we will send that recording out as well. Thank you again to my panelists. This conversation could not have happened without you and your vulnerability and your expertise. So thank you again. Everybody, take care of yourself. It is a very busy month, and it is a very emotionally charged one. So have grace. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Sonia.
Bye-bye.